And so it gives you a chance to just year-round, good year-round gardening information at absolutely no cost, which is always a nice thing. How are you doing today? Oh, good. Let me give you a couple of these things here. And if you do so, I like to pass around a sign-in sheet. You can print, you can scribble, you can just put an X there. Just so I can prove to my colleagues that I came to Krum this evening. So, just a minute to get that done, and then we will get started. It's hard to be thinking about full season planning, isn't it, in a day like today? Good Lord. And we've been so fortunate. We've had great rain. We got some surprise. I saw you guys got a surprise shower here a few days ago too. So yeah, we can all use for some extra water. I can attest to that. So. I'm anticipating that school must be starting because I see young ladies in cheerleading uniforms and very exciting.
Yeah, school starts next week.
I have 4 children, and those days are now behind me, but I do have a couple of grandchildren, one 2 and another one about 4 months. So I look forward to those days in my future. I know they'll come quick. It sure seems like my own kids grew up quickly, but it's always exciting when a new school year. There's always trepidation and worry and meet the new teacher and what are they going to be like? And I think my primary qualification was homework. I want somebody that gives a longest amount of homework. That just never seemed to play out in my work. So let me tell you a little bit about me. I am Jeff Hardgrave. I have been a Master Gardener since 2023. It is something, frankly, I aspired to do after 45 years in the energy industry, and so it's a new job. It's kind of a new job. I've always wanted to learn about gardening. I had an amazing, prolific father-in-law who was an incredible gardener, and I always enjoyed the benefits of his labor, and I so regret at a time, it was in the time I was right out of school and newly married, and I really wish I had spent so much more time. But he was an amazing gardener, and I think it's not a day that I don't really think of him. And when I spend a lot of my time, volunteer time, working in community gardens, because we get those proceeds go to the food bank, and so it's really a lot of fun. But it's kind of amazing to think about being out there harvesting vegetables, and then knowing those are being cooked at 11 a.m. in the morning to feed people at noon. It's just amazing how different those vegetables seem to taste when you're just harvesting them fresh, and being able to cook and enjoy them. So it's lots of fun. If you don't know anything about the Denton County Master Gardeners, let me tell you a little bit about us. Our goal, as you see here, is to educate and inspire people about horticultural practices and really to enrich our communities. And that could be in ornamental gardens, that could be in community gardens where we're raising fruits and vegetables and things. We have 300 plus members now in the organization from Denton County. We are not a garden club. So my image of a garden club is nothing like what we do. My image of a garden club is people that get together and talk about gardening and maybe don't do so much gardening. We're about a doer, okay? And so to give you a little bit of an idea, just in the first 6 months of the year, we've already logged 26,000 volunteer hours, which is not an insignificant amount. And another thing I always like to mention, there's 3 really active community gardens that we're involved with. You start north up at Stanger, there's an area up there that's sponsored by First Refuge called, Community Strong Farm. And they're, this very week, they've been erecting a hoop house up there to expand their production. And they're doing some great things with the school, like at Sanger, about distributing food to students. Then you come further down into Denton, and there's Shallow Fields Garden. I don't know if you've heard of Shallow Fields. It is the largest community garden in North America. And all those proceeds, they have 2 paid staff that work about a 10 to 15 acre area and have volunteers in there 5 days a week. They're only closed on Sunday and Wednesday. And it's an incredible, if you ever get a chance, it's down near University 288 around Mingo, down in that particular area. And in our own organization, then we have one more, a community garden down in Flower Mound, sponsored by Flower Mound First Baptist Church. And that garden produced about 5,000 pounds of vegetables last year that went to CCA. And we're already this year, thank you, Lord, for all this extra rain we got through the middle of July. We've already produced about 3,500 pounds. So it's really interesting. And it's fun, but we also have other projects throughout Denton County where, take for example, there's a senior living center called Fair Oaks down in Denton, where, it's a 3.5 acre plot with 8 buildings, like 8 apartments in each of those buildings. And we have a vegetable garden for them that the residents can go out, and we're there and work that garden every Monday, and we take those vegetables and donate those to the residents. So it's a lot of fun. My own background, though, when I started in 2023, oh my gosh, I was very intimidated about becoming a gardener, because I've always had interest in it. I've always aspired to do that. And so our program, the Master Gardener program, sits under Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. So we go through about a 70-hour horticulture program. Classroom hours, you have like 14 classes that, and essentially those are about 5.5 hours in length. And then you go home and take an online test, and then you have to meet volunteer hours and service hours to work in those projects. But you come out, you really understand the science around growing. And it's been a really enjoyable experience for me. So much so, my own today alone, in 2025, I've already volunteered just over 1,000 hours. I had 1,000 hours a day. Or because of you, you're sharing my anniversary here with me. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to visit and discuss a little bit. One, it's about kind of thinking about your garden and what those requirements are that will really help make you successful in a first crop. Fall gardening is particularly interesting because we're really talking about a relatively short season. So I'm going to show you some things you can consider planting, through the month of August, September, and October. Normally we don't have a freeze until generally it's just past the middle of November. So there's some pretty good opportunities. And you don't have to have a big plot of land. You can do container gardening. Last year, I had 4 large containers that I fed my family with okra all summer long, that we were going. I was trying to do some experiments that I had learned about from A&M. But really the reasons for doing a fall garden, I'm going to add some to what this list here, because I'm going to indicate to you how much of perhaps maybe a lazy gardener that I am. Is the nice thing about fall gardening is it's cooling off and it's easier to work in the yard. And even though you kind of start in this August period when it can be particularly, it's still challenging. And we've had some incredibly mean Septembers, where I remember September of 2004, I think we had the first 10 days were in excess of 100 degrees. So it can be challenging. But one thing that's really nice is it's really less stressful on the plants when you do a fall type gardening. And you have the insects that kind of gotten their fill, and so they're kind of at bay as things begin to cool off. And frankly, a lot of plants that we're going to talk about tonight require cooler temperatures. And yes, it is a common thing. And before someone asks me, yes, the growth of plants are slower, so they don't develop as prolifically as you would expect in the spring. But think about the reasons for that. In the spring, we're generally enjoying lots of rainfall in the spring, and we get good natural water. At this time of year, oh my gosh, you and your hose are getting friends. You don't have to make really good friends unless you're fortunate enough to have some type of irrigation system to help you. But largely that slow growth does equate to more flavor. When we think about gardening, gardening is a lot like the statement about real estate. Location, where you choose to have your garden out there. And I think it's also fair to mention, we should think about when we're talking about doing something in the fall, whether you're starting small or you're doing something maybe prolific like in this picture, there's one key element that just makes the whole thing come together. And that is you still need about 6 hours of sunlight every single day. You know, and some of that sun, okay, let's just call it what it is. In August, you know, sometimes it's spelled incorrectly. It should be spelled Hell, I think is what most people think. But that location is really important. That 6 hours of sunlight, if you can manage and enjoy good morning sun on those crops where maybe it's shaded in the afternoon, that's a big benefit to you as well, because we all know that afternoon sun can be pretty brutal how it feels on you. When you think about preparing the soil, one of the things that I like about this picture is something that you know I see more and more people ask about as I go around and do these presentations, and have been doing so through the spring and the summer, is people get interested and want to talk a lot about having raised beds, raised bed gardening. Raised beds they are convenient, but they can be really expensive. And they're expensive because sometimes you have to build this infrastructure up, right, to have something to contain that. I mean, you can buy some very expensive planters that kind of range from about 16 inches in height up to about 32 inches in height, which the great thing about that is, if the taller they are, the easier they are to work. Okay, right? You're not bending over, putting yourself on the back. My friend who has this particular garden loves the fact that she can sit on the edge of that and work her garden, sit down and be able to do that. But also think though, if you're having something raised bed, that can have a pretty demanding effect on the amount of soil that you need in there. And so there's all kinds of crazy ideas that people are putting in there to displace and reduce that soil. And I'll tell you just how crazy some of those ideas are. Some of them are plastic water bottles, empty plastic water bottles that they would throw down in the base of this. So it would drain particularly well, but it would displace that soil up higher so you didn't have to maybe buy so much soil. Those crazy styrofoam peanuts that you see that are just driving you nuts when you get something cracked in those, they're great for protecting your products. But there are a lot of things, people are getting more innovative just because most of the time when you build one of these type of gardens, you're really wanting to have maybe some landscape fabric under to keep grass from permeating up in there. But you know, it really requires you to start with great soil. Soil is really your fundamental component. And you know, I was down, I believe it was last Saturday morning. I live in Double Oak, which is out there by Flower Mound, Bartonville, and I have a wonderful 31-year-old daughter who has all aspirations for gardening and no investment in labor. Because I'm still jumping over whatever hoop she holds out there for me to do. That's just, something guys, I guess dads and daughters do. But she's maxing me out. Let me help you. But I made a couple of trips to, we have Home Depot nearby me and also the Lowe's. But I've also been down to Green Acres, which is a big nursery down there in Irving. They've got one in Salina now. And I am astounded at how many choices in soils and compost and things that you can get, you know, and I want to try to demystify some of that and encourage you to think about just a soil that maybe has a light compost mixture or maybe a light fertilizer mixture. And I'm talking about an organic soil. And so the fertilizer that I see that a lot of people are very happy with, and because it's not too much fertilizer can burn your plants, is maybe those that may have something like 15% chicken manure or something like that. Just enough nutrients in there that really won't burn the plants or burn the plants through, but will really help them get off to a really acceptable start. And so you really need that first 10 or 12 inches of your soil from the top of your bed here to be mixed fairly well with some amount of compost. So that's good organic matter. We talk a lot about fertilizing, and there's so many fertilizers on the market. You know, I mean, you can get liquid fertilizers, and I'm sure you've seen products like Miracle Grow, etc. There's some really, really good ones that are just 100% organic. But fertilizing really tries to, or it's really meant for the roots, right? You have good established roots, then your plant's going to be healthy and strong. And roots are very, very important in ensuring that whatever crop you're going to grow, let me tell you, it's all founded on what you don't see above ground, but not what's below ground. So when we talk about fertilizing, I'm going to give you a couple of keys in a minute to do that you can think about what to buy and purchase. And it's not going to require much. That's the thing. Don't spend a lot of money and don't buy a big bag of that. But you know, it's also important to get the soil wet, kind of understand how much moisture it'll hold. It's not real complicated. You know, if you've got an index finger and some soft soil, you can stick that finger in there, and if you can feel moisture, you're probably good, not needing to water. The right plant, boy. One thing, this is a good practice mistake that I have made repeatedly, and it's nice when you make the same mistake twice. You recognize it, and so you can ultimately learn from it. But really, the key is we like to think of plants and crops, especially edibles. We like to think about grouping those plants together with plants that have light water requirements, which they need about the same amount of. You know, we talk about everyone loves tomatoes, right? Tomatoes is a big, I mean, these feed stores that sell tomato plants, they just kind of like their top crop, right? They have so many varieties, right? But tomatoes are what? They're thirsty. They're looking, they require an incredible amount of water. And it's a delicate plant balance. But ensuring that you put the right thing in your garden, and that, you know, I like to say, it's amazing to me that people will grow things that they don't eat. Which is, I mean, it's incredible. Now, in some respects, I like that because some of those people, they actually bring food to the food bank and donate that or donate this. But some people like to grow just because the ornamental value of how those, you know, collard greens are absolutely beautiful. I mean, the structure, and I mean, they are just, and man, if you can cook collard greens, you can get me to be your laborer all day long. I mean, nobody can cook those like my mom, but the component of having the right plan really is your first real key to success, right? Because if you plant something that you enjoy eating, it's amazing what your investment will be in taking care of it. You'll be willing, or the best fertilizer is the gardening shadow. I mean, it's an interesting concept, but we should talk about some of these plants just so you're thinking about what. So, we're already into a time. I've kind of grouped these for you to think about kind of the time frame, because remember, I'm kind of driven by this particular date here, right? That first frost. And so, you see something on there you like that you recognize and like, say, yeah, I'd like to grow that. Okra is one of the most durable plants that you can grow, because one, it enjoys the heat, it loves the heat, but you have to be mindful about harvesting it. And because if you don't, you're growing railroad spikes, right? I mean, literally, those spikes will get hard, they will get, and you won't be able to chew them. I mean, literally, they're just so incredibly strong. Lima beans are, I didn't know you could not have frozen lima beans, that you didn't need frozen lima beans. You could grow fresh lima beans. I really enjoy lima beans, but that's a July crop, because in those areas, you're looking for about somewhere between 54 and about 65 days to a point of harvest. So that's something you're either going to go down to, well, if you're in Denton, you would go to Dennis's farm store down there, and he has some plants that are already started that you could still get some things under your belt. Peppers in August, last week at the Flower Mound First Baptist Community Garden, we had a ton of peppers. We also had a ton of black-eyed peas. I shelled peas for 3 hours, right? Stayed them through a sheller, that we had. And I kind of feel about black-eyed peas the same way I feel about ice cream. I never met any I didn't like. But as you look through those lists, onions are beautiful, and I love fresh onions. It's amazing how aromatic and there's just so much moisture in there. So sweet corn is another one. But these are the core fall crops that's really available to you. You're welcome to take a picture of that. The information that I gave you, I should go ahead and tell you, part of the reason I gave you this particular sheet, you'll see this as a slide later, this is where all my research came for this presentation tonight. And all that material is free. You don't have to pay for it. But that's a really good indicator. That chart is actually taken from, I believe it's Dr. Masafny's presentation, Fall Vegetable Gardening Guide, the second one on here. We're really fortunate that in Plano, A&M AgriLife has a big agricultural center there, and they've got a guy that's just 100% dedicated to tomatoes. In fact, he sponsored a tomato day back in the early part of July, and spent literally 5 hours on growing tomatoes. And then we went out to a trial garden that he had and see all these different varieties that he was growing. It's really, really phenomenal. Yes, sure.
So these are things that the ones for August, you can plant in August.
Yes.
Not when we're harvesting.
That's correct. I put something down here that I find that people repeatedly have trouble with, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what those are, because fresh asparagus is, oh my gosh, so different from grocery store asparagus. It's incredible. I didn't think I liked asparagus till I had fresh asparagus. It's really. But asparagus is an interesting crop to grow. once you get it started, you can have, there's a garden here in Denton, a friend of mine has, and she has asparagus that just comes up every single year, and it's been there for 15 years. It has a great long life, but it has some interesting characteristics. It's soil nutrition. It is somewhat a hog in needing nutrients, so it requires fertilization to get that started and established, which is pretty important. Garlic is another one that's strange. Garlic is a water hog, and the thing about garlic, when you plant garlic, it takes literally, you see nothing for weeks, maybe a couple of weeks, while the root system is establishing, and then suddenly you go out there one day and there's a single shoot. And what happens is that shoot will sometimes desiccate the plant, dry the plant out, because its water requirements are very, very high early on. But if you water it too much, it's real fickle. The roots will seek to rot, but if that shoot is up there and it's getting too much water, literally it will dry out the bulb underground. So I put that on there because it's intimidating. Nobody likes to not have success, right, in what they're growing. They like to see something more prolific, get some benefit out of it. Another one is sweet potato. Why do you think sweet potato might be a challenge in the fall?
I don't know.
It's crazy. It's because it's the length of time it takes to grow, and it pushes you right up to that freeze, and they are very sensitive to cold weather. I mean, I think they listen to a forecast or something, because they literally, their growth characteristics, you can just have lower, cooler temperatures for several days, and the plants will almost immediately react to that. And so that's really your best success in the sweet potato realm, is doing something where you're in those warmer type temperatures. I should go back. So look, when we talk about the first average frost, that Mother Nature is fickle. She moves around. She just has when it's cool. And it does seem to me that our winters are warmer. And it does seem to me, which in one sense, it extends your growing season in that. But you always have to be mindful of those temperatures, because I'm surprised by those first cool fronts. I enjoy them. I'm not saying I don't dislike them. But if you're counting on something special out of your garden, that cool front can kind of literally spell disaster. But 2 years ago, we didn't have a freeze until early December, which is interesting to me. And gosh, we don't want to go back to the Uri storm, and I don't want to even think about how disastrous that was for plants, especially a lot of ornamentals. But just be mindful that date is an average date. And so you just want to be thinking about that date in this fashion. Is if you're getting ready to plant something, and on that seed packet or on that label that comes on this plant you've already bought that's germinated and ready to get in the ground, it'll tell you approximate days to harvest. And if you're getting up there knocking on that door of November 17th, you could be some disappointed. So just manage your expectations here. Caring for gardens. Why do you think we are so picky about wanting to keep weeds out of the garden? What does weeds do to your garden?
Take the nutrients out.
It does. It's there. It eats the first part. It's there because it's pulling the nutrients out of the soil. And so you don't want your plants having to compete for feeding those weeds. And so the thing we like to think about is using an all nitrogen fertilizer around the plants, and do that, and nothing more than a tablespoonful. It's a very small amount, and you would just sprinkle that tablespoonful within about 6 or 8 inches of the base of the plant. out there, try to make it even. If you don't get it even, just mix it around with your hand. Now, when you go look for that fertilizer, this 2100, that fertilizer, it gets its nitrogen. It's just not nitrogen in a bag. It's generally ammonium sulfate. And that ammonium sulfate does two things. The nitrogen comes as precipitates out of that ammonium, but the sulfate component is very nutritious for the roots. That's where we want to get good success. We want to be feeding those roots. And so you literally, I can't say this enough. This is a mistake that I've made many times. Is sometimes we think fertilizer. Think, well, I'll just put a little bit more. I just have a little bit more in this bag. I should apply it on there. Really, those fertilizers are so well tested. You always want to follow your label directions on there. I mean, you're literally wasting money if you're putting more on there than required. And when we talk about trying to feed and nurture our edible plants, it's really true to just, instead of being broadcasting that, like we think about broadcasting fertilizer over a lawn, we want that ammonium sulfate to be put right there around the plant. Again, 6 or 8 inches, just and a tablespoon, a little dab of hooey. It's really, really great. And you want to water those plants every day for the first 2 weeks. And it sounds like a lot. But if you've got the right amount, if you've got a good mix of compost in there and good drainage, it'll be fine. But what we're wanting to do is encourage that plant to reach down, those roots to get further into the ground, right? Get strong, because that's going to give us the edible part, foliage. After that first 2 weeks, you can really water deeply at about, you're really trying to get about an inch, similar to an inch of rainfall a week, literally, is what we're looking about. And if I told you before, I'm an irrigator, so I believe in drip irrigation. Drip irrigation is getting easier and easier and easier to apply. You can buy little kits. I even have a friend and a man who has containers on her porch, and she's using drip for her containers now. You can literally buy kits that will cover 100 linear feet for less than $50. They're not expensive. They're very, very easy to use. And Lord knows, if you're ever hungry for instruction, you just drip irrigation into YouTube and bingo, you'll get a load of information. But drip irrigation really works well because it really puts the water right where it needs. And last November, I put a drip irrigation system in for one of our members who has 50 different varieties of roses in a rose garden. And each one of those roses has one little line of drip going to them. And they have enjoyed a really beautiful summer. They bloomed literally all summer. But because we're just putting the water at the rose, we're not spending as much time weeding. And they have 2 additional beds they'd like to do. So they've got 140 varieties on this 2-acre plot. This is really, really beautiful. But, again, the best thing you can do for your plants is be out there with them. Be the gardener shadow that makes that happen. Pests. Oh my gosh. I have one of my colleagues at Master Gardeners here, is a real interesting guy, but he and I went to class together. He's a Juilliard trained musician, plays the trumpet. He was a band director before he retired. He's really, really smart guy. And Mario has got all into pests. I mean, he's our bug guy, right? He's taken some advanced training, and he's really, really making a difference in our organization because he's really a very approachable guy. He's good to share information with. But, people are always calling him now because asking him, what type of bug is this and what is that? And how do you treat that? you know, one of the things that's so nice in spring, but generally because of moisture, is why our pest problem is so great in the spring, but that's diminished quite a bit in the fall. So, there's things that we do to try to protect our plants. And one is you can go on Amazon. I think I saw some the other day at Home Depot. They make a spun web fabric, a kind of a gray fabric that is used to kind of cover your rows. And so if you're trying to protect that, sometimes you're trying to protect from sun scald, hot part of the day, you might want to be putting some shade on there. But it also, literally, my friend that has cherry tomatoes, she doesn't like birds when those things are, she loves birds year round, but she doesn't like them when they come eat her cherry tomatoes. But when you see bugs, or some of the best, it's just to hand remove those, right? Pick them off the plant, introduce them. Another value of a raised bed, it provides one extra level of protection away from those bugs. A good way is just to wash those off. It's just hose them off. And you see us use product like spinosad or insecticidal soap, neem oil is another one. Bacillus thuringiensis works really well. Even diatomaceous earth, which really, when the bugs crawl over that, it literally cuts their exoskeleton, so it really damages. We try to be, this may surprise you, we try to use chemicals very, very sparingly. And so in doing so, you want to be using those very sparingly, especially when you're having edibles, right? Things that you're going to consume. But the thing I would tell you is most responses are not unlike how your doctor treats you. They try to start with the minimal thing first, right? Let's get an x-ray or let's get a test. Well, that's kind of the way gardeners are. We're kind of trained in trying to take small steps that doesn't really invade or impact the other plants. And so there are many, many things you can do. Water alone, that insecticide is really valuable. But I have seen literally, in a garden last May, and they had the eternal squash borer, right? And squash borers are just almost impossible to get rid of. And it immediately, all I learned from taking all those plants out came down to this. I think I'll get my squash at Whole Foods or Kroger. Because if you have them in your garden, it's virtually impossible to get rid of. We are still keeping a plot this area that we had to take out last year. We didn't plant squash this year for that very reason, because we know they're in the soil. Sometimes it may take as long as 3 years to get rid of those. And so then you've done your hard work, you're giving them water, you're fertilizing, you're trying to keep them wet. And you just get a good chance, and then, you got to harvest. And sometimes we are not our best friends in the harvest. And here's what I mean by that. Sometimes it's very easy. You've got a nice pair of pruners that you may not clean those pruners from one type of plant to the next. And so you could be passing on a pathogen by not cleaning those. And I'll tell you what we do. We got people that do everything. I've got one friend, she's got 1 part bleach to 9 parts water, and she just soaks them in water. Most of us, some of you have the antiseptic wipes, that are already saturated. You buy at the grocery store, right? And wipe their tools down. I'm even more lazy than that. I just get spray Lysol, right? Just spray them between them. And that's why we don't normally think about that so much on vegetables, because they're generally in close proximity, right, to each other. But it's possible to introduce a pathogen by cutting those and not having your clippers clean. So having good shears or pruners is really important. Of course, you know, a garden for, I like that, you know, this daughter I was telling you about is a registered nurse, and she spent the first 5 years of her nursing career down at MD Anderson. And she was treating, patients with skin cancer. And she made it clear to me, you know, I'm a big believer in sunscreen or in long sleeve protective shirts, especially as I continue to age here and get to fight all these other little maladies that come visit you as we get older. But it's really important to protect yourself in that. So that can mean gloves, a hat, you know, long sleeves. But when you harvest, most everyone likes to harvest either in the morning or the afternoon, right? But the only thing you really should be cognizant of is that when you harvest, you'd like to do that when the dew is dry. So that kind of moves you up to the late morning. You know, I was kind of watching at my house today, like before things were dry. And literally it was about 10:15 or 10:30 before I noticed that. And, you know, I did put something on here that kind of goes against a little bit of the academic nature of gardening. But this website that I put on here, if you ever have questions about when to harvest something, you know, how we're trying to determine, is it ripe enough or is this the time I should pick this? This article here will really guide you. Take a picture of that or something if you want to. Is from the Farmer's Almanac. But it says it kind of in practical terms that I can understand that. And I was trying to encourage my wife. I brought her a cantaloupe, a fresh cantaloupe out of one of the gardens, and it had been dropped when they were loading it. And they said, oh, we don't want to take this because it's going to bruise, you know. Of course, I brought it home and she just consumed it, you know, I mean, took it right then. And she was like, oh, you know, how do you know when they're ripe? And so she got on the website and here was looking at this and she was reading some things with me. And she said, look at this. This explains really about how to tell that. And you know, sometimes that's a complicated thing. My early crops of okra that I was going to sell to, you know, Southern Pacific for railroad spikes, we're going to let them stay on the vine too long. They got too stiff. It's really a great component to think about. It seems like anytime we talk about vegetables, somebody always wants to talk about herbs. And so there are some really basic things about herbs that I'm learning. We have a specialty group in Master Gardeners that they do public programs from time to time that they call Herbal Branch. And they do everything from make, you know, tea, and I was reading something, one of them was making something called prickly pear punch or something that comes from a succulent, that they're going to extract juice from a succulent and things. But herbs are so popular and they can be a real great companion plant in your gardens because they don't take up particularly too much space and we don't have a high demand for them, right? In terms of use, we're not trying to get a lot of something there, but we're using it for flavoring. You know, if they're just annuals, you really start those from seeds. But if they're perennials, you know, you can get those and propagate those from a cutting. Get some, you know, just type root hormone on Amazon, buy some rooting hormone. It's really, really great. And while it does require the same care as your veggie garden does in terms of just weeding and fertilization, remember, it's just as easy if you're cooking spaghetti to go out there and cut some basil off of there and take that and really get some benefit from that. Of course, this is our resource slide that you have a paper copy of. You can look up. I encourage you. You'll see a guy's name on a couple of these papers. Dr. Joseph Masabny. He's the Texas A&M AgriLife Native Specialist. And also I gave you one of these little cards that you can say, look at, you know, we have if you looked at any other, just type, pick a county and type Master Gardener, type, like Denton County Master Gardeners. We have a very robust website. It's very different from any other, the other state website. We made a really big investment there to put year-round gardening information in there. It's free. It costs you nothing. You can get the Root, a free e-magazine that's published on the first day of every month. It's written by Master Gardeners. And it's not only just, it's not really a technical magazine. It is spread with a lot of humor too. We have a lady that writes in there, does a feature called Gardening Grandma, and she's one of our longer tenured mentors. And it's the most popular article. I mean, it's amazing how many hits that thing gets. We have a help desk also, that if you have a problem with a tree or an ornamental, you can take a picture of that. You can go to the website, upload that picture, leave a voicemail message, send an email. They'll contact you back with your problem, try to help you and do that. We have these things like me, speakers engagement, where we come out and talk. We do an annual plant sale that's done toward the end of November. It's held at the Denton County Fairgrounds. It is the only fundraiser that we use all years. And we have plants that Master Gardeners grow. We have nursery plants there. And they're generally about a third less in cost. That occurs generally in the third weekend on the third Saturday of April, typically. And it's really good. And then we have a garden tour that's done on Mother's Day weekend where we open different yards. This year it was in Denton. We had 5 gardens that you could visit for like $20. And then if you go to dcmga.com, you can look at the calendar. You can find public tours and classes. We have offered Krum 4 programs for the fall. This is the first, and I think we'll have 3 more, 1 a month here that we're working on. And we're going to talk about native plants here. In fact, I may be back to be the person you'll be stuck with again to talk about natives, but we'll have some incredible pictures. The value of native plants are just really, really, really incredible, what they can do to your landscape, because they are tolerant of this crazy climate that we have. So you've been really kind to pay attention. I appreciate you coming out tonight, braving the challenging parking conditions on us. I'd be happy to hang around and answer any questions that you may have. But again, thank you so much for coming.
I have a question.
Sure.
Denton's landfill, I can't think of what it's called exactly. They have compost.
They have grades of what's called dino dirt.
Yes.
And they have dino dirt light, and then they've got some that's more coarse. Most gardeners do not use that for vegetables,
Okay.
but they use it as an amendment to the soil for their vegetables. So you wouldn't be using it 100%, but you might have some added there in just a small,
Okay.
in a small quantity.
Yeah.
We, one of my colleagues, for one of the projects I volunteered for him and work at, he buys about 15 yards of that a year and we put that in our ornamental gardens, where we might have flowers. We have a lot of natives at this project that I'm thinking about. And we had really, really good success for that. And it breaks down over time, but it really gives the plants a boost. It's really, and I think it helps the city too, being able to turn around and market that. But it's a great soil additive, especially for your ornamental plants. Several people I know also mix that 50% with soil, like a topsoil, and then we'll use it for a top dressing on their lawn, right? If you had a low spot in your yard, that aggravated you or something, I've got 2 or 3 of those, and they mix that up and then spread that and lightly fill that, and have had really good results from that. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Yes. Oh, sure.
We just moved out here and there's a lot of plants. everywhere.
Oh my gosh.
I filled up the little patch of gardens.
Yeah.
It was late in the spring and I couldn't stand being under a bubble lamp and not put the garden in, so I filled up the patch of garden.
Good, yeah.
And I didn't have the time or the bandwidth to really add much to it. I put a little bit of soil and compost on it.
Yeah, we didn't have much money,
Well,
Well, they can get, yeah.
a tiller, and it took a long time to do it.
it took you like 5 hours.
It is so hard. You know, and there's, I'm so glad you asked that question because this is what I did all day Saturday, is addressing that clay problem. So my daughter lives over in Aledo, Texas, and I'm redoing her flower beds. And the clay that's in the soil, you know, it just holds the water literally forever. And, you know, she's worried about that, breeding mosquitoes and taking her two kids outside about that. And so there's an amendment that we use to help break that clay up, and it's called expanded shell. And let me tell you a little bit about that. When you look, expanded shell is shell that's been heated to a very, very high temperature, and it's almost like rocks or pebbles. But what it does is it creates porosity in the soil. So I'll tell you I mean, I followed the book by this because I was on a project last year that we bought 5 yards of 5 cubic yards, which is not a small amount of expanded shell, 5 yards of compost, 5 yards of soil, and tilled this all into this garden. But the expanded shell improves that drainage, and it allows that water to permeate deeper, which encourages your roots to also go down there deeper. 40 pounds of expanded shell, I believe Metters and Denton carries expanded shell, but you can, for 40 pounds, you would expect to pay about $14.50 for a 40-pound bag.
And you would mix that equal parts
You-
soil.
You would, but if you're not, just adding that alone to your clay will make a big, huge improvement. Yeah, break it.
And if I do that and then keep adding layers of compost and mulch.
You bet, you're nourishing the soil, you bet, and as that decays and breaks down, the thing that the expanded shell does is so different is because it adds porosity to the soil, then those nutrients, that compost and things you're adding, it breaks down and penetrates too. So I'm a really big believer in it because our soils are not very garden friendly, you know, but it's really the work. And so in her case, I had an area that's about 110 square feet. And I'll tell you exactly what I'd done. We had weeded it and cleaned that all up. It had a lot of Bermuda in there, but we spent a couple of weekends doing that. And then I put that expanded shell in there. It took about 4 of those 40-pound bags to give me about an inch or an inch and a half over that 100 square feet. So I'm telling you can probably get 20, 25 square feet out of just a single one of those bags, okay? Which is just like 5 by 5. But then I came back and I tilled that, and I tilled it, and I tilled it, and then I tilled it. And finally I tilled it and added some water to it, but it really made a difference. And, you know, my son-in-law and daughter were so shocked at how it made, and he said, well, it looks like rock. You know, it looks kind of like rock. It's dark, but you're going to lay some mulch or something over that anyway, but it does really help break that clay up. I tell you, it would be much cheaper if you could afford to buy it in bulk, like have you know, several yards delivered. But if you're just doing a small area, it may. And I had friends that use that. We'll put a cup of that in a large pot, right, where they just dug soil out of their pasture and mix it with that and have great results. So it's really helpful. Yeah, expanded shell. But it improves the water absorption by about 35%. So science shows that. So it really, really makes a difference. That's an excellent question. Okay, you go for two. Yeah, no, I'm
So I know when tomatoes go, and I've got like tall, leggy, smattering tomatoes. If I prune those back, will it kill them? Or will they possibly fruit again?
Nah, it's probably gonna take care of them because it's probably gonna kill them. I mean, I have seen them fruit again. I have seen they fruit again, but in that situation, that gentleman was covering those tomatoes from about 1 to 6 in the afternoon. He had a shade that built this elaborate plastic frame, and he was trying to keep that afternoon sign off of them. And he worked hard, but bless him, he didn't even get a dozen tomatoes off of that, but he worked really hard just trying to shield it from that. And that variety, as I recall, is Celebrity. Okay, it might be one that you see. I think it's pretty common.
I had terrible luck with tomatoes the first year. I had raised beds.
Mm-hmm.
And also long, I didn't get any tomatoes, and we left town for a month. And I said, well, our garden can get that anyway, and I came back, and I had tomatoes until Christmas. 10 pounds tomatoes a plant.
Oh, that's Mother Nature. She does things, man. She's not gonna let us feel any sense of control. I'll tell you. Isn't that amazing? So how do you irrigate that? Do you just hand water that? Just take hose out there and hand water?
Well, the one that I got now?
Yeah. Mhm.
I do.
Yeah.
And I don't, and we just moved into this house, and I've got it set way far away from water. So I don't drag that 200 feet, but hose out often enough.
Yeah, right.
And so I need to get something set up where I've got irrigation, where drip lines and things like that set up.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I said, I got eager. I didn't have the time or anything to put into it, but I just said, I can't have all this around.
Yeah. You know, it's real interesting. The folks that I did this raised bed for, or I did the drip irrigation in the rose bed, is he had fell and broke his hip and was injured, and he just adores his roses. They're just a wonderful couple, Pat and Don Edwards. And so he was going through rehab from this hip thing, and they were getting ready to bring him home from the hospital. And hand watering their beds on their property was 3.5 hours, 3 to 4 times a week. You know, I mean, it was just, it's brutal being out there. I mean, I know holding a hose is not too physically demanding, but you don't want to do that. And by adding that drip, it's gave so much time back that you weren't doing that. And then the roses really flourished, because they're getting a consistent amount of water, and so there's pretty inexpensive ways, even with something out that you fill that far. I mean, 100 feet.
I can run a hose 15 miles, or 50. It's where our gates are placed, where I don't have to walk all.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think if I can get a drip hose, I can just do something connected.
Yeah. The only, as speaking as an irrigator, the only advice I would give you is about this. I just took a special class I went to A&M and took a class on drip irrigation, advanced drip irrigation. You have to do that for your license, but I went and took this other class, and they showed us some research. All of you are familiar with soaker hoses, right? That you screw in there and just, it's permeable and water drips out. Well, they've done a tremendous amount of research. Like they had them in different lengths there. And what they found, the research showed, is they don't water evenly. The ones closer to the source water really good, but as you get further down the hole, it begins to play out. And so if you're using that in something like a vegetable garden, you potentially are overwatering something at the expense of trying to get water to the end. So I would tell you, you should maybe investigate like the drip irrigation, 100 foot of drip tubing, just the tubing, no holes in it. You can buy it with holes or you can buy it without, is like $50. And it's cheaper than, it's about the price of a really good quality hose, but it's just so easy to connect, and then you can put drippers on there. There's a little tool that you can
Does it
have.
have a hose that connects to your water faucet?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes.
So you don't have to worry about PCV pipe?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so one of the things I do in the garden, because of course I'm the irrigator, right? So I'm doing these things, is I actually taught a class for Gardeners Monday about how to hook a drip system up. You know, you could just buy one of these kits and it comes completely with a pressure regulator that'll screw right on your hose bib, right? And how you can do that. It's really very forgiving, and it can just give you some of your life back, right? And kind of get my very good friend Ann, and she's oh gosh, she's such a prolific gardener. She just knows so much about gardening, but she's from Ireland, and she tries to go home in Ireland and stay for about a month, and her yard is just incredible. It's got native plants and vegetables and things. And so I was just nagging her, literally, like, you should try to do one of these drip kits. And she said, well, you pick one out for me and I'll buy it, okay? And so I did. I picked one out. She ordered it. I mean, it's $50. And she said, she was all wringing her hands. I don't know if I can do this. I said, I would like for you just, if you can't do it, I'll come help you, okay? But please try. Now, let me tell you about this lady. She's got a PhD in bioscience, okay? I mean, she is mofo smart. I'm just telling you, I'm not suitable to hold the flashlight for her. But I said, I would like you to follow the instructions that come with it. She sends me this note on Sunday afternoon, like 12:30 on the Sunday afternoon. So, okay, your phone rings, please answer. You know, I want to try to do this. And it's 2 hours later, she sent and said, oh my gosh, that was so easy. It's just such a methodical step. But, you know, she had that and she fixed it with a hose bib timer, right? She turned that water on when she left. Those plants were beautiful. I did drive by her house twice while she was gone, because I was just fearful that, like, I talked her into this thing. It may not work, but you know, they really did well. They really did well. She didn't lose anything during that period, and she was gone 4 weeks.
That's great.
But you know, it's a lot. It's like most things. You kind of don't know what you don't understand, but it's real easy to do. And there's incredible YouTube videos out there that you could look at. Sprinkler Warehouse or Drip Depot is another one that does kind of those things. Just go to Google or something and type drip irrigation supplies or truck video. It's really easy. So you get a good return, and you get some time back. But you know, the thing I'd also say is you get some benefit of your vegetables or your ornamentals really getting watered well. That can really make a difference for you. So
This would help with allergic foundation.
absolutely it does. Oh, you bet. Because that's one of the things that's so interesting, is it helps keep that moisture consistent, and it doesn't use a terrible amount of water, a large amount of water. In most of those applications, they use a tubing. It's about 1/2 inch in diameter. You can run about almost 400 feet of that. Now remember, I told you it's about $50 per 100 feet is what that tubing costs, okay? And those emitters built in the tubing will only they're spaced every 12 inches, okay? Those holes are, and they deliver 1 gallon an hour. Not very much water, but they're very slow and deliberate, and that can really stabilize your foundation. And then you can just get more sophisticated. You can buy soil sensors and hook that if you've got an irrigation system, you know, to do that. But it will really help stabilize your foundation by keeping that consistent. And really the period that we're all worried about is really this period that we're kind of in now. It's really from that that June through about the end of September till our rain comes back. But, you know, we've been fortunate to have some really good rain events that very surprising but helpful, you know. Good question. Yeah, thanks for appreciate you bringing that up. It's, yeah, it's really interesting. You know, we're seeing people like, municipalities, this comes up a lot, where, if you live in a conventional yard in town, right, and you have a sidewalk maybe in front of your house, and you got that little narrow strip between the sidewalk and the curb, right? The gardeners call that the hail strip because it's so hard to irrigate and water. You know, a lot of the cities now are outlawing sprinkler heads in there and forcing you to put drip irrigation in that area. And one of our gardeners, I think that is an ordinance now that the city of Aubrey passed, maybe about 5 years ago. But one of our gardeners over there that I work with, she has drip in an area that's only about 5 feet wide, and it's a 50-foot wide lot, right? You know, and the turnout there, I'm telling you, I think she could dig it up and plant it in her yard, and it's just so prolific having that water underground, you know, and it's not soggy. And she runs it for like 15 minutes, 3 times a week, and you can't even tell it's watering, but it's that slow drip. It's nourishing those roots, and it's just, and it's Bermuda grass. Now look, you know, I mean, Bermuda's Texas stuff, right? But it is just really prolific because of that drip irrigation. But, you know, in some cities, I was down talking to the Parks and Recs manager at the city of Carrollton last week, and she was telling me that, you know, this time of year, if your irrigation throws water in the street and the water runs down the street, they'll fine you like $75. And if it's, you know, and once they get you in their database, you know, they got the police officers driving through the neighborhood in the wee hours of the morning, checking to be sure that water's not running off. And of course, I live adjacent to Flower Mound, and Flower Mound spends an incredible amount of money for water. They have a lot of trees in their medians and things. And sometimes I'd be leaving early in the morning, I see all that water, and I see, and water's going to be expensive, man. Our state faces a real challenge with the growth that we're having and additional water. I mean, I think we're going to all water's going to be more expensive than now. I really think that way, you know. But so if you can efficiency, so I think that's one of the programs that we're going to begin to emphasize in next year's series of speaking engagement, is talking more about home water conservation, how you can do that. I'm taking a class at the end of this month on water auditing, about how to achieve that efficiency. And it's really all field work where you go out and set these special cans up within dimensions of the sprinkler to capture how much the water the sprinkler's throwing, you know, and how even that distribution is, and create something they call a densogram, which is how intense the water is on that. So it's really interesting, but I do really think water is going to get it's a very precious resource. I mean, I sure like to drink it. Well, thank you guys. You've been a wonderful audience. I enjoyed speaking with you. And hope you'll come back. They'll have an announcement on the web. So when we've got that next one scheduled, so yeah, we'd love to have you.
Sounds good.
That will be the first Thursday of, it's August right now, September, first Thursday of September, same time. I do want to let y'all know,